Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, and delighted to be joined once more by Craig by the Bond Again podcast for another episode of the Pixar Retrospective. And this week we are talking about the 2020 film Brave, directed by Mark Andrews and Brenda Chapman, a film I've never spoke about, I think, to anyone but one friend, and I'm delighted to be doing so tonight. How are you doing, Craig?
I'm very good. I've enjoyed the film. Well, spoiler alert. And I'm looking forward to an interesting chat with you, George. Thanks for having me back.
No problem. It's amazing to get you on for this one. And I'm going to apologise in advance, people at home. I've been a little bit ill this week. I have actually been feeling better for the last day, and I'm glad I did because I looked absolutely abhorrent. I hadn't shaven for like 5 days. I was a mess. So I'm glad I've got some kind of voice back, but there may be lots of water breaks. Who knows? But this is an interesting one. We're heading into the 2010s. This is the first original Pixar film of the 2010s, which is quite fascinating. We've just obviously done reviews on Cars 2, Toy Story 3. Had an amazing time doing those, not just plugging the series for other people, but this is going to be nice to go back to something new, something different. And in the pre-chat, we sort of said there's little firsts in the schedule today, which does make it very interesting as a Pixar film, particularly its legacy and the character of Merida and what's happened in the almost 15 years since. But before I get into all of that, I am going to read out the idea. Sorry, I was going to put you on the spot of a question, but I haven't actually come up with one, which is my own fault. So I'm going to jump straight into the IMDb plot synopsis, which is: determined to make her own path in life, Princess Merida defies a custom that brings chaos to her kingdom. Granted one wish, Merida must rely on her bravery and her archery skills to undo a beastly curse. A very interesting one. And Craig, I'm very curious for yourself. We always talk about our memories of the film. Did you get to see this at cinema? Like, what's your history with Brave leading up to today?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw this at the cinema. I would have been, I guess, maybe early 20s when this came out. So it's one that I saw as an adult rather than a youngster. I remember two things about it. One was that it was the first time Pixar was taking on a Disney princess. And I spent a lot of my teenage years visiting Scotland, and even in a kind of pastiche Hollywood way, I've got a sort of cinematic representations of Scotland. So that's what took me to the cinema to go and see it. Lovely.
I didn't get the chance to see the cinema. I said I didn't get the chance. I would have been 16. I think I remember this film coming out. I would have been in the last year of secondary school. And I did see this around the time Monsters University came out, which was a weird time. I think we might have spoke about Ratatouille when I was at secondary school. I was in that very teenage phase of I don't do animated films. Obviously, 5 years later, I'm at the end of secondary school and I'm into film. And it was only my A-levels where I started really catching up and wanting to watch these films. I got to see things like Up. Oh, God, I forgot Polly's name. Obviously, I had Toy Story. Unfortunately, Cars 2 was in there. And Brave was one of those that when I got around to it, I remember watching it on Blu-ray. And I was like, I like this. I didn't love it. I liked it. I thought it was interesting. It was a bit different. I don't have any Scottish heritage, but as someone who... It's really weird to talk about the British film industry, because obviously this is Pixar, this is American money still. I do like it when American productions try to somewhat authentically do other historic elements or other countries. That sounds really strange to say like I'm defending how studios are, because I'm just thinking about all the terrible times studios have done stuff such as this. And they almost could have done this. We'll get to a casting thing, which I had no idea about a little bit later on. But I remember liking it, and I never went back to it. I've got a very good friend who's been on the channel before, and she's a massive fan of Brave and Merida. So I know it's massive within Disney culture. Is that a weird phrase to say? I know Merida's become an official Disney princess. Yeah, the first Pixar I think, only Pixar Disney princess. And apparently at the time there was some controversy around that, which surprised me somewhat, which has been interesting to do a little bit of reading about. The controversy not being the redesign, but how dare Pixar have a Disney princess, which I thought was interesting criticism. Maybe a reflection of social media in the early 10s when it starts to become the type of social media it's fully become since. I don't know that's the wrong set to use. But if we get into some of that behind the scenes, because this was only the second ever time I've seen the film, a few of these things I was aware of, a few I wasn't. And originally it was called The Bear and the Bow. And I'm sure I had heard that before, which I think is a great actual title. I do prefer it to the word Brave. But what did surprise me is that production began as far back as 2006. Now, I know it takes many years to make animated films, particularly an original concept through Pixar. At this point in time, obviously, they've done 2 sequels back to back with Toy Story 3 and Cars 2. So it is interesting that the 2010s become, I would say, a topic of discussion for Pixar. Maybe not at this point in Brave, but you start to get more sequels, a few original films, and the latter, you're moving into that sequel territory. Is that a conversation under Disney's ownership, Disney structure, more so than Pixar? But Brave, I feel like, is not forgotten about, but sits in a very awkward position, because where I'd say, just thinking out loud, this isn't on any of my notes, if Brave had come out before Toy Story 3 and Cars 2, I feel like people may speak about it a little bit more. Is that strange of me to say?
No, I understand. But it's interesting because my recollection at the time was that, I suppose in my mind, because they're only 2 years apart, it really sits in a bracket with Tangled, which obviously was Walt Disney Animation Pictures. And so at the time, I feel like they kind of felt quite of a piece, and it was, sort of a reimagining of these sort of lead female characters within animation. But it's interesting that Brave, I feel like, is the one that continues to have the sort of cultural footprint, as people like to say, whereas Tangled, I feel like, has kind of, slipped into something of obscurity.
I agree with that. So I've never seen Tangled, but I am aware of its reputation. I know what it's about. I know all the discussion at the moment is there's a live action reboot, then there wasn't, and now there is again. You are right. They feel like they came out much closer together than they did. And I want to say Brave is also not far off of Frozen, which was that 2011 or 13? I can't remember. But they all sort of not blend into one, but that timing, that era of the films that were being made. And I feel like on a side piece with Disney, whilst my knowledge isn't there with Disney animated, Tangled, was that their first almost traditional Disney princess film? I know they did Princess and the Frog in quite a while. That the early 2000s felt very experimental for Disney. Not everything worked on the animated, but I felt like in that late noughties into the early 10s, they started to, I don't want to say resurface, but have another era as such of I don't want to say popularity, because Disney's always been popular, but it felt like we were further away from Chicken Little, if I can pick on him.
For sure, yeah. I think certainly like a reimagining, right? Princess and the Frog was obviously like responding to cultural criticisms of Disney princesses, and I think in a lot of ways Tangled was doing the same, and Brave was doing the same as well. And so it was a kind of, I think all of these films are sort of trying to reimagine what those characters can be like, what the parameters are, and to some extent also maybe even addressing some of the problematic histories of those archetypes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think a big discussion with this is the choice of director. So Brenda Chapman was originally on board working on Brave. Now, I don't know if I'll get told off this. I have not seen The Prince of Egypt, which is what I know was the film she directed before. I know it is beloved by many of my friends. and
It's
it's
all right.
one of the DreamWorks' early. It's one of the early DreamWorks animated films, isn't it?
Mm.
Where they're finding their feet. So I hadn't seen anything she's done. I've not seen anything she's done since. But she came up with the concept for it. It was inspired by her relationship with her daughter, very much openly in the mindset of that she was more like the mother, which is interesting. Not to criticize any parenting because I don't have children to do so, but if she's openly saying I'm more like the mother character who's very guarded about discipline, about maintaining standards, I say, fair play for admitting that. And if that's allowed you to influence a film, then kudos to it. That relationship is now a part of film history. So she was involved, going back to 2006, as I mentioned, and she was at the time the first female director on a Disney film.
Wow.
Going to the character of Merida, this was going to be the first. Well, this is the first female protagonist too. Now that part didn't change, but unfortunately, it did for Brenda Chapman, as she was removed as the director and replaced by Mark Andrews, who I'm also unfamiliar with, I will add. Which, and this might be not a topic of contention, but for a film that we'll discuss as many firsts, another one is this is the first fairy tale that Pixar's done. And I'm scanning in my head if it's the only fairy tale, because I think Onward is more of a traditional fantasy film than a fairy tale. But I don't know if there's any others that are jumping out of my head. But to have this first female protagonist, first female director, new Disney princess, removing the director and bringing somebody else in, it makes it a little bit awkward in terms of us doing a retrospect discussing the legacy and whatnot. But to its credit, and this is really difficult to say, so if I'm a bit slow, apologies. I want to make sure I say the right thing and not get it wrong. If there is a story decision and a business decision to be made by a creative at the top of a hierarchy, then sometimes that decision has to be made for the better of the film. I don't mean that to sound controversial, to sound like I'm a studio sycophant. I'm not at all. There's been examples where it's historically succeeded. Rogue One is the one I'm going to jump to every time. Gareth Edwards had his film. I would love to see one day what his film was. But on came Tony Gilroy, and the rest is history. But Gareth Edwards still promoted the film. He's still attached to the film as the director. And he spoke about the film publicly quite a bit since. I've even been to a screening with him in attendance in his hometown for charity. If he had no attachment to that film, he wouldn't be doing events such as that. So I respect that. Granted, he'll never discuss what truly happened. And I think Brave is in a similar boat because Brenda Chapman retained the director credit, became a co-director. She classified as the Oscar winner. Spoiler alert for the later on in the video when we discuss its Oscars. And she's obviously spoken about it since, and she's been very public in doing so, saying that the story is still there, my film is still there. There was just obviously somebody else came on board, and it's a tricky one to talk about it because we haven't had that with Pixar, where we've had directors removed, like Ratatouille, and Brad Bird comes on and does his film, but there's no mention of what was there before. What do you think of a studio making this call? Because there's a delicacy, I feel personally, when discussing them, but also when studios make those decisions.
Well, I mean, I don't know the reasons. Perhaps you have more insight on that. But we see it so often, don't we, that directors are kind of forced to drop out, one way or another, and then become completely distant from the film. I think if there's anything that kind of rescues what I'm sure was a tough situation, without knowing any details, it's the fact that the story has remained, the credit is still there. And one of the things I think is interesting about is that we've clearly seen kind of, let's say, generational dynamic play out in a lot of animated films. Coming of age, parent and child, like this is very familiar territory to us. But the scenes earlier on where Merida and Eleanor, and I'm sure we'll get into plot, are kind of arguing with one another, or arguing, practicing arguing with one another, I should say. We get to see that dynamic so much more clearly. Actually, I feel like it takes it as far as you could take a family film without it becoming a different type of film altogether. And it was struck me watching it now how almost visceral that kind of exchange was, the stakes, which to me suggests that people who have been involved with the creative decisions are deeply attached to the material. And so the fact that she's been inspired by relationships with her daughter, I think comes through. It's not just a kind of idea that has come up in a kind of storyboarding brainstorm.
I agree. I think that's a really good point. Just going back to what you said about the reasons why she was removed. So officially it's creative differences, as is always the case. There's very little out there. However, it is believed that Brenda Chapman had more of a focus on the fantasy witch magical side, whereas Disney were leaning more towards the, I guess you could say, the core story at heart of the, maybe not necessarily the relationship, but the non-fantasy elements. So because it is interesting that not the witch just magically comes and goes, but it feels the first sort of the sequence of her as a child, where you've got the blue mist, did they call it?
The wisps. Or as I wrote in my notes, the blue British gas wisps, because they look like something from like a British gas advert.
Yeah. Oh, they do it. They've got the bright blue, haven't they? That kind of not disappears, but what is this? And then it just ends up becoming they're going to pop up when there's going to be something fantasy involved. And I can't sit there and say, I can blatantly see what was someone else's vision versus someone else. I think it is consistent. And I'm in the same bit as you. The family side of things is really quite unprecedented. I've not got, I'm not a mother, neither a daughter, so I can't talk about that bond. But I've witnessed arguments with my sisters and my mom when we were younger. I've had similar arguments with my dad. Obviously, in this sort of story, the father-son argument would be probably war-related or something, given the firstborn or that. So I really appreciate the perspective of the mother and daughter, because also with Pixar and so many Disney films, it is always the king, and it is always about him being an antagonist to the future of his child. And I quite appreciate that actually in this film, I'm not saying the mother's antagonist, she's really not, but it's how do we fix the relationship between the mother and the daughter? And I really like the fact that without jumping too quickly as the father, it's Billy Connolly, it's comic relief, and he's a very likable character too, right? That he's not in the way, he's not obstructive, he's very much a secondary character, yet he's the king. And I really appreciate the approach to the production of that family relation. Even the brothers, they're not, we're going to leapfrog you to aspire to the throne. They're just kids. They're comic relief. They've got a great relationship with their sister. And I think the film does a phenomenal job, actually, the more I'm thinking about it now, in setting up everything to come with turning into the bear and the witchcraft side. Because it's very much a family drama that involves magic, if that still makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm gonna keep my powder dry for when we get into the story, but I think there's also a bit of cultural commentary in there, right? Yeah. Like, I mean, we see it in fairly superficial things like the particularly around the king and queen, and the king, as with the male suitors, being kind of comic relief. But I also think that there's something in there, and the fantasy elements draw this out for me, that goes beyond just a kind of question of tradition or modernization. I think there's something actually a little bit deeper in there that taps into the sort of folkloric elements, but we'll get there.
Yeah, no, agreed. And something I'll talk about whilst we're all talking about behind the scenes. So this is a really not awkward part to talk about, but I was trying to figure out, do I put this in the character section or should I put it earlier at the end? But I'm going to put it here. So Merida, as we spoke about, has become an official Disney princess, the 11th out of 13 of the official qualified ones. Qualified, what makes them qualified? Who knows? Disney.com. In the lead up to the release, a new character model of Merida was shown to the world, beginning to go on products. And compared to the final image of the film, which we've obviously we've watched the film, she has less curly hair. It's more of a glamorized curl. Her face isn't thinned, but the eyes are rounder and placed, and she becomes more of a caricature Disney princess. This led to a lot of online criticism, which I find interesting, because there was some criticism from the get-go that she'd be Disney princess, and then when they'd obviously made the character model known and people understood they'd seen in trailers, to then look to changing the character model to appease the Disney image, and Disney would back down and apologize. I quite respect that. Again, it sounds like I'm a studio shill, and I hate the word shill. I like the fact that they didn't have to alter someone's identity to become a princess, right? That maybe that was their intention, and they realized, okay, this was wrong to do so let's stick to what it is. Because I would just say, like, even as a continuity guy, as someone that's been to Disneyland twice, once at the age of like 5 and the other at the age of 11. If the marketing and everything looked completely different, that wouldn't be Merida. And not just of the design, but you have to accept that this is a Pixar film. This is a Pixar animated character fitting into the other. And that's what I think is quite brave about it. No pun intended under the sun. It is that, can we take this from over the studio? And apparently there were criticisms at the time that now that Disney had bought Pixar, there's a Disney princess, there's a fairy tale, there's this. But I think the film goes the other way, that she wants her independence and she doesn't want to have these suitors at this young age and to be drawn into the traditional fairy tale tropes and the traditional firstborn daughter in the family type thing, which is obviously generationally part of royal families and so often. So I quite like the blowback to the design, and I don't think it's fair to compare it to something like Sonic, where this is an abhorrent creature design that's going to be in a feature film. This. This is we're trying to do something to sell more toys and fit into a longer narrative to make it look different, and I'm glad it didn't. I don't know if you've got any similar thoughts, because I don't have the Disney knowledge, I think, personally, to know the ins and outs. I'm sure other people would, but for me, as a background observation, I like how it ended with Brave and how they've gone to her in the future.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a gendered aspect, right? In that I feel like the alternative has a thinner waist, more kind of Barbie-like proportions, has to kind of have haircut implied, and the hair, rather than kind of being a bit sort of loose and shaggy and rough, like, is sort of glamorous. And like, I think clearly the question about what kinds of representations we're putting in front of young girls and young boys is a very old one, but I do think it's one worth having. It's these we come back to, we say on these podcasts, both on Cinema Savvy and on Bond Again, so often the conversation will revert back to how things made you feel in childhood. And so I do think it matters. I don't think it's superficial to think really clearly. And I actually think that in this case in particular, where they ended up serves the story better as well, and serves the animation better.
Yes, I'm going to the word animation. That's the word I was missing, because I sort of botched my ending to saying that. I find it interesting, and something I'm going to add to that story with some more behind the scenes stuff. So with everything that's happened with John Lasseter since, and I think it will be around the time it gets Toy Story 4, maybe, when it's covered in the canon of us doing the series. I won't do a whole, hey, let's have a 10-minute discussion on John Lasseter being removed. Brenda Chapman did speak about her relationship with John Lasseter after he was removed from Disney, and she said it was totally understandable as to why. Very quiet, a short opinion, not making accusations or anything, but that's clearly an additional thing that went on in the background to her being removed as director. Again, I've got to be careful how I say that, and it's understandable if that was the case. And something else I do want to talk about. This blew my mind. This does sound like a Wikipedia, but this was me discovering something on Wikipedia. I'm not going to lie. Pixar created 3 tartans for the film. Now, you've mentioned you travel to Scotland, so you can please mock and break me or any Scottish viewers. I had no idea there is something called the Scottish Register of Tartans. And it feels like if you want to submit a tartan design, you put it through them. I've only been there twice. Scotland, it was 2 weekends, 1 weekend in Glasgow for wrestling purposes and over in Edinburgh for film purposes. So I don't have any knowledge of historical Scotland. I had no idea this is a thing. And I kind of love the fact that Disney really embraced the Scottish culture for the film. They would go in to design their own tartans. Now, I don't know if that means if a shop wants to make a kilt or something, do they have a lookbook and it's every tartan type ever? But that's completely blown me. And I feel like there's a podcast somewhere that's going to do like a deep dive one day into like every type of tartan. Did you know about this? Because it's honestly blown my mind. That's all I've been thinking about leading into this.
I did know about it because, of course, while tartans originally, as I understand it, would be specific to particular families and clans. And so, there are tartans that go back hundreds and hundreds of years. I know about it in part because I'm not Scottish myself and I have Scottish heritage, but I do have a Scottish first name. And so there's a Craig tartan that I've looked up more than once, and when I would be in Scotland I would go and have a look at that. Unfortunately, it's not to my eye, it's not a very aesthetically pleasing tartan, so maybe I need to design a new one. And I don't know, like obviously at some level the idea of there being this like registry where you can enter your own tartan is maybe a little bit opportunistic and confusing now. Probably it's a bit like how you can probably name your own star or something like that. But clearly it keeps like a public interest up and the rest of it. And I feel like it's at least a bit more of a gesture to be like, okay, rather than just like steal someone else's tartan, we're going to create our own tartan and add it as a kind of an entry, which is, the opposite of a kind of Braveheart approach, which I believe is a great film, but obviously gets people's backs up in Scotland for understandable reasons. So I'd much rather have about it this way.
No, I agree. And I think, without getting into politics too much, some Scottish MPs were not happy with Disney, basically saying that the Scottish Registry exists to stop people like Disney being involved. But I think you can look at both sides, can't you? Because if they grabbed a random color that worked and they look at the family history and that family's like, not family, but hypothetical descendants and whatnot, or historians are like, this is a really terrible representation of this. It's better to sort of do their own thing, and fair play to the animators, because I'd read that they'd had to create software programs for this. 2 new programs were developed across a 3-year period. I can't get the names of them, and I love getting names of the software. But one of them was involved with the creation of the costumes, and the other one allowed for simulation for Merida's hair curls, which is quite incredible. That once again, we talk about innovation, we talk about Pixar. At this point, they're almost 20 years since Toy Story 1's came out, and you think they've done all they can, and it's like, we've got to design another program for a curly head character, and you sat there like, fair play. And I think that adds a little bit of insult, if I can say that, to the original Disney idea of the Disney princess, that let's not stereotype, let's glamorize the curls into the very traditional like model curls, rather than them being loose and flowing. And I love that about her character design, that she feels that she has so much of an identity with her hair. And it's knowing they had to create software to do that, fair play. And another thing, lad, this really did catch me off guard. The last sort of technical thing, and I know this section's got shorter as the series has developed, but this was the first ever film to use Dolby Atmos. That's thrown me. I don't know if you're familiar with Dolby Atmos or anybody at home. It is I guess you could say the benchmark of sound within cinema these days. It's essentially 3D sound. It travels above and around. Some cinemas could have theoretically hundreds of speakers. It could have 5 speakers, but it's very much a technology that I thought was more in its infancy than it actually is. I guess it's the home media side of Dolby Atmos is still a little bit newer than the cinema ones, which I can't say I've seen this at the cinema, so I can't comment, and I certainly haven't seen it at Dolby Atmos cinema, but I will say in a non-horrible way, I have only really, and because I rewatched it this week, I've only been able to really appreciate Dolby Atmos traditionally in action films, or like sci-fi, where you know it's going above and around you and whatnot. Not that it takes anything away from Brave. I was like reading, I was like, oh, that's a cool little nod. I mean, anything you want to add on those before?
Well, I have to say it's lost on me. Well, yeah, sure. I think unfortunately on this rewatch, the sound quality was lost on me because I don't have a great setup at home. Certainly, I mean, my local cinema only has Dolby Atmos and above screens. So if there is a re-release, then I will go and check it out for sure. However, I think the decision to, you know, push the boat out for her hair design has stood the test of time. Watching it even this week, I feel like my eyes were kind of really drawn to her hair throughout. It still stands up. There are some shots where, I mean, this, I don't even mean this in a bad way, but you can tell that her hair is being made with a different program to the rest of the design, like it's doing it different. But it's really important to the characterization. And yeah, I feel like it's something that, I don't know, like going back to this film, there are elements of the plot that I'd completely forgotten, but the attention to detail with the movement of her hair was something that I had remembered, and it was just as good as I remembered it being.
Yeah, it's like a weird compliment. It's almost a character in itself, and then it adds to. I mean, I think
this is like when people say that the location is a character in its own right, but her hair is a character in its own right in this case.
And I mean, even here, okay, we're in a broadcast studio, so I don't think you can see this, but in the corner of the screen, I've got the thumbnail, like in a really small little box, and I'm sat there just staring at the orange, and it's even flowing and glowing in this tiny cropped image on the corner of my screen, and you know, oh God, not even talking about impact, but it's there, it's prominent. Like you think of Brave, you think of Merida. What are the standout characteristics? It is the hair and it's the bow. It's not necessarily, I don't want to say the story in a disrespectful way, but if you lined up all those Disney princesses one by one, those distinct images, they are rightfully within that, and I love it for that. And a scene in this film which I really appreciate, which is so important to a character, is when they do have her dressed up, put on the tight sort of corset, cover the hair, you can't even have a little drop going down on your forehead. And you do realize in that costume change, wow, that's a completely different character who we spent time with, which is the purpose of that scene and for her to want her independence. I mean, let's talk some of the story, because I mean, where do we begin with this? It is at its core a mother and daughter story, which Pixar hasn't done at this point in time. We're 13 films in now. 13 films, yeah, we are. And this is the first time we've got a mother-daughter. The first female lead, as we already said. I really like that this is the core of the story. And whilst the fantasy elements, we're getting to turning the mother into the bear, bringing in the hook, you know, we've got to repair this so she doesn't permanently become one and lose her mind. I think Pixar, I don't know the right words to say this, I want to call this film underrated, and I don't know if that sounds like a final thought, it's not my intention. I think people aren't really talking about Brave in 2026 in the same way. Not that they should, because that sounds arrogant to say, but I think as an original film concept, whilst it's got inspirations of fantasy, of the Scottish Highlands and history, it is an original film. It isn't adapting any prior source material. It isn't adapting anything before. It's It's not a remake. It's not based off real life. It is its own story within the Scottish Highlands, if I'm allowed to say that. And I don't think it's seen upon as that. And it's a weird thing for me to say because I've got no evidence to back that up. Or maybe that was a little bit of my thoughts before this, but I was really caught off guard on this watch this week. And maybe because I've done those first 12 Pixar films, right, which we've had 2 sequels in a row and they're in franchises we know and have continued since this point, whereas Brave hasn't. It feels so isolated, which isn't a criticism, but it just also feels at the same time I've not came across many people talking about it, which is odd because there's so many things that work for this, and the story itself, I think it's very powerful. I think it's a very powerful story between family, and Pixar is at its best when it is diving into the most personal things, and the mother-daughter relationship is those.
Yeah, I mean, also not to give like final thoughts, but this is very strong tier Pixar for me. And look, I'll maybe get out of the way like a few things that I think don't work for me, because I'm really keen to talk about the things that do work. So like I am a bit less interested in the kind of chase / hunt in the woods stuff towards the end. I also think there's a bit of a lull when it's just Merida and her mother kind of as Bear in the woods. And this is really because I think that the dialogue takes a hit, and Merida has to begin kind of, narrating what's happening. I think the climactic scene with the kind of aggressor bear, Mordu, is a bit mother's love cliche, which I always roll my eyes at a little bit. And my final thing is that there is a weird boob gag in there that it just seems completely out of place to me, where one of the brothers as a bear drop into maybe the housekeeper or something, the nanny, like drops into her cleavage, and that just seems very odd. But this is all just to get that out of the way, because I do think that clearly coming of age stories are just like bread and butter for Disney and also for Pixar. So this could really easily just be very well trodden territory. But for these films to work, they have to be able to bring something new. And I feel like what's new in this film about the relationship is that it's invoking, I suppose, wider ideas. And maybe I am, going to get a bit political. Like I think it's evoking kind of wider ideas, not just around, do we choose tradition or modernity, and probably land somewhere in the middle, and which feels a bit superficial. But actually, I think it's reminding us of the contingency of the things that we call traditions. So clearly, we have this sort of generation where Merida is kind of straining against like the wishes of her mother, but we've also got another matriarchal figure in the film, which is the witch, who is sort of almost calling back to an earlier time before the idea of social organization through matrimony. If you'll indulge me, George, in a very brief diversion into political theory, like there's a lot that's been written. I'm mostly thinking of a theorist called Silvia Federici, who wrote a book called Caliban and the Witch, and it's about essentially how like the role of women in society in this kind of like early modern period was crafted and molded to patriarchal standards. And part of that was the demonization of the figure of the witch. So people who got cookies traditionally were people women who had certain types of knowledge. So particularly knowledge around birth and birthing, but also like medicine as well. And these sort of forms of knowledge, which obviously was a form of power within society, were then kind of demonized, and we saw this kind of, let's say, corralling of women quite violently, really, into the boxes that then lasted quite a long time until probably the 20th century. And so like there's actually this kind of interesting like historical commentary that's like happening, sort of like lurking in the background. Like it's not done to death or anything, but it's kind of like lurking in the background and like invokes this kind of like folkloric or paganistic sort of tradition that is interesting thematically. It's interesting because of the Scottish connection, and it's interesting and successful because this is very much the currency of Disney, right? And so I think it sort of succeeds on all those levels, and that makes it super interesting for me. Although there were definitely no bears in medieval Scotland, but we'll get on to bears in a second.
I don't know how to respond to that in a great way. I was not aware of that, and I think that's incredible to hear. So I very much appreciate that. And that's me saying it genuinely, not just because we're on the stream. And I absolutely agree with everything you said on that point. This film, and even looking at it from the 2010 lens, I don't want to even. I'm not scared to talk. We can do politics on the channel at any time, but 2012 feels like a very pivotal point in 21st century politics, where we are before. I have like a pre-Brexit and post-Brexit politics cycle. And whilst I was a bit younger, pre-Brexit, this felt like where there were being more prominent female characters, right? And people weren't getting angry. I say people weren't getting angry. I don't know the right words. But this is the first Pixar. Yeah, fair enough, 13. If it had been the first one in 2025, right, you'd have the usual suspects screaming, shouting, woke, all that absolute nonsense. So this is where I'm kind of sat with this, where it feels at a pivotal point where they are starting to do this. And if I get really delicate on film terminology, because I don't want to get accused of something which is no intention, this is also before the issues I agree with, which is before the tokenism came in of let's reboot Ghostbusters with women. I know that's the whipping tree one they go to. Before they did it to the Ocean's films and other ones.
Yeah.
We're all bored of the Jane Bond conversations. We all know anyone with a brain cell is never going to happen. The creators of Eternity says it's never going to happen. But guess what? People still talk about it because it creates headlines. It creates rage. It creates clicks and views and currency. And I think Brave sits on its own in a beautiful little way. That this was before I feel like the shitstorm of modern politics. If I can,
we can still have nice things.
Yes, exactly. We can still have nice things. And it feels like 10 years later, the reaction to this film, right, would just be horrific. Not even 10 years later, 4 years later.
No,
look at what happened after episode 7. So, yeah, it's, again, I can't speak as eloquently as you, but there is a lot of politics within this. And I do think a core of that does come from hiring a female director to begin with, choosing to make it a mother. Because a lot of these films would do the father-daughter relationship, right? When it does come into
that would be the easy one, wouldn't it?
Yeah, betrothals and everything. You'd think father-daughter, but it's not, and it works for that. But I will very politely hand over to you, not because you're speaking better than me. You wanted to talk about the bear. Do we want to talk about not?
I did want to talk about the bear. I mean, we should do that series because that's a great show. I'd be happy to do that one with you any time. Another time, though. No, the bears is interesting because I was watching it and I was thinking, oh yeah, this was the big plot element that I completely forgotten about. Mom turns into a bear, and that's basically the film in a way, which is, I mean, it's got a little slightly sort of Shrek vibes about it, hasn't it? But whatever. Like, but then I was thinking, but why is it bears? Because bears aren't in Scotland. I mean, using bears in Scotland, but I was like, I'm sure they weren't there recently. So I looked it up, and there were definitely no bears in medieval Scotland. So I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. Why is it like? Is it a bear just because we kind of see bears quite a lot in animated films? Fox and the Hound comes to mind. There's a bear in that, and I thought someone must have looked into this and thought about it, because I feel like it's significant that the bear is her mother as well. And because of, you know, this kind of background of folklore and stuff, I just had something in the back of my mind about like myths of like women turning into animals and things like that. And so I looked it up and I found this paper. Unfortunately, I can't remember the authors, but there was a bit of a discussion about this and how bears within mythology have often been a symbol of transition from girlhood to motherhood, which I thought was interesting, right? So I did a bit more digging, and it turns out that there's an ancient Greek kind of mythological root to this. There was such thing as I'm going to read it out because I'll get it wrong, as the Brauronion, which was a sanctuary of the goddess Artemis. Artemis was the goddess of hunting and the wilderness, which tracks, right? But also the protector of women in pregnancy and childbirth. And obviously, if we're thinking about, you know, kind of older times than now, people are beginning to think about pregnancy and childbirth around the age that Merida, rather than as we might think now. Now, this Brauronion also had a cult attached to it, which sounds very cool, where they had a rite called Arctia, in which girls would imitate bears. And this was kind of a way of finding some kind of like psychic balance. I mean, I don't know. I guess, you know, puberty, hormones are raging, like let your inner bear out, and then you kind of, you know, everything balance up and you feel better, which kind of tracks with the story about, you know, finding this kind of like internal moderation and so on. And so this, I mean, this seems too much of a coincidence not to have directly inspired the film. So I think there must be something there, but it just seems super interesting to me because it opens up a whole kind of subtext that is not just about the relationship between the generations, which is into the coming of age thing, but also like what it means to come of age as a girl, which feels important, like in the context of this film and also in the kind of social context, as we just mentioned. So I didn't know anything about the, I'm going to keep reading it out because I can't remember off the top of my head, Brauronion. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong to any ancient Greeks out there. And the Sanctuary of Artemis. But this was just really fascinating to me.
No, I like that as well. I'd not even thought about tracing back the history with the bear side of it. And that is interesting because Pixar normally, I say normally, this isn't me criticizing them, they're very in depth. Like when we spoke about Nemo, like the research that they went into, I know it's a bit different with fish, but the Great Barrier Reef, what's Australia, what you can and can't do in these areas, these regions, they do have that approach. And when we're talking about a film that began production in 2006, which is 6 years before it comes out, whether or not the writers have been looking into that, you are right. Because when I thought of bears, like they've had a bear in Pixar before. Like, yeah, they've had monsters, but they're not just gonna. You see some animated films where they'll take a character render. It's happened a lot. What was it? It's not procedure. Planet of the Apes. I haven't seen the Robbie Williams biopic. Apparently, it's amazing. But the monkey, the model, the character model for Robbie Williams in that is one that was not used in one of the Planet of the Apes films. Yep. Fair enough. Recycle, reuse.
Wow.
But that's fascinating. Yeah, they let them. I'm guessing it might have been like, I don't know if it's horrible, a background ape maybe. Like it wasn't the Caesar character model, but I feel that's become more of a thing in recent years where I feel you can look at some CGI characters or films and it looks like that model looks familiar, and it tends to then come out eventually. Which nothing wrong with that as far as I'm concerned, if it's permission is allowed and whatnot.
This was the thing. Sorry to interrupt you, George. Of Robin Hood, right? In Disney, because they did the whole. I don't know much about animation, but they started using like Xerox, like reprinting and stuff. And so in Robin Hood, there are a lot of recycled characters from, I think, the Jungle Book and things like that. So it's kind of got some kind of precedent within animation too.
Yeah, and I mean, even live action costumes. You know, Bosk in Star Wars is a Doctor Who costume. And it even
No,
recently,
really.
yeah, that the big one recently, Sinners, which we can now see is a 16-time nominated Oscar film. That
Wow.
uses costumes from the unmade Blade Marvel film. That rhymes. To which at one point in time, Blade was going to be a period piece in the 30s. Poor Mahershala Ali. Even the costumes got a job before he did.
Wow.
And Ryan Coogler had the same costume designer. They made a deal with Disney, and because I think for whenever they're going to make Blade, it's going to be modern day now. So them costumes are sat in a vault. So yeah, the costume designer came, took some of the ones he'd built, put them in Sinners, and it's a great way to recycle some things in the film industry. Obviously, Disney would have made
That is amazing. I had no idea.
Oh yeah, it's equally as impressive as it is sad that the Blade film has still not been made. I know it's not like a deal breaker, but that when your costumes are finding life before that film, that's a worry. One day he'll appear. One day. I mean, we talk a couple of characters. We don't have Blade in this, which is a shame. That'd have been quite something. But let's talk Merida. She's voiced by Kelly Macdonald, who most people will be familiar with, I think, for Trainspotting. That's the thing I know from Best, as well as a very, very small role in the Deathly Hallows Part 2 as the Ghost of Ravenclaw. She wasn't originally cast. This has really thrown me, finding this out in the lead up to this. Reese Witherspoon was originally cast as Merida, which I don't dislike Reese Witherspoon. I will make an incredibly bold claim. This film would have failed with Reese Witherspoon in the lead. Not to discredit her performance as an actress. When you're really, I'm not saying playing the Scottish heritage card, because that sounds like a criticism. It's not, but when the film clearly has a deep appreciation for what we spoke about, right? Designing their own tartans, to then go and get an American actress who is very popular, very famous, to play the role. She would officially leave because of scheduling reasons. And in a 2018 interview, Reese Witherspoon said that she left because she just couldn't do a Scottish accent, and that it was mutual that she couldn't do it and didn't want to impact the film. I've got to say,
worse for the best then.
Yeah, this is it, and I'm not calling her a bad actress by any means at all under the sun. I'm really not, but I was very surprised that she was even officially cast to begin with if she struggled with the accent. Now, whether she gave it a go, hired a linguist, who knows? We know that some actors can do incredible Scottish accents, vice versa. Many Scots can do great British and American accents. I think would have been a completely different film. And I think what benefits Merida is Kelly Macdonald isn't a household name. That you don't have the star power. Because we'll talk about Billy Connolly very shortly, but sometimes when you can hear the actor through the lead, and Pixar has benefited. Tom Hanks' Woody is outstanding. And again, it sounds like Tom Hanks, but it's also Woody. But I think for something such as Brave, Reese Witherspoon is just not the correct call. And the character of Merida, this sounds really disrespectful to Kevin, it's not meant to, isn't beholden to the voice actor behind her, right? They are one with the other. And I don't, it would have gone down as, it's really unfair because I'm looking at modern lens again, but the whole Chris Pratt in Onward, Tom Holland in Onward is like, because it's Chris Pratt and Tom Holland. You lose sense of their characters. Whereas to me, Merida would just be Reese Witherspoon. If it was Reese Witherspoon, it wouldn't be Merida. It'd be the same character.
No,
same
I completely
story.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I really like her. I also can't wrap my head around why on earth didn't you get a Scottish person from day one?
It's strange, isn't it? I mean, I guess like the old bankability question, and we're starting to get the beginning of like around this time of like star casting within animation, as opposed to people who are primarily voice actors. I think Reese is great, like amazing in Walk the Line. She can do a lot of different American accents. I'm not surprised she can't do a Scottish accent. I'm a big Kelly Macdonald fan, actually. She's great in a series called Giri Haji. If people have ever seen that, they should check it out. It didn't get as much pickup as it ought to have. She was great in Line of Duty. And I feel like she's got an edge to her that I don't think I've seen in Reese Witherspoon's filmography. Could be wrong. Incapable of it or anything, but I think she's got an edge to her that is exactly what the character of Merida needs. Perhaps a little bit controversially, because she's a great actress, but I don't tend to rate Emma Thompson's accents. And the one thing that did great on me a little bit in this was that Emma Thompson seemed to begin about half of her lines with "och," which just felt a little bit hammy for me. Sorry, Emma. I love you really.
Emma Thompson's a fascinating one because obviously she's a legend of British cinema, no denying. And this isn't the Harry Potter childhood in me, but when I think of Emma Thompson, she's taken a lot of very weird roles. As much as she's obviously been a thespian of the past and she's had incredible dramatic roles elsewhere, there are certain roles I've always found loop to her. And whilst it's such a small role and she sort of mocks it now, Trelawney in Harry Potter is put on the weird voice and be weird for a few films, which is fine because that's what that character's a raging alcoholic, but I understand why they couldn't do that in those films. But in this, I can't. Right, okay. Hear me out if this sounds weird or not. Okay, we've got Billy Connolly as the king, and okay, you had Reese Witherspoon, but it became Macdonald, right? Did you not want to get a Scot to voice the second most important character of the film? Whilst Emma Thompson is, English, she's born here, she's from the British Isles. For me, who isn't a Scotsman, I know the Scots are very patriotic too, which is probably worth adding. I'm a bit like, the accent. Not to make an impression of her, but she could do the accent. But you're right. There's certain caricatures that sneak their way in, and obviously when she becomes a bear, it's very muted, which also somewhat adds to the element of. You need to go all out on that role specifically. It's a weird criticism from me because I like a bit of authenticity. In the same way, Finding Nemo has a lot of Australian actors, and it doesn't have anyone. It'd be like getting someone from New Zealand, right, and saying go do an Australian accent. They'd be like, "What?" Like, yeah, you're next door to them. You're practically them. It's not the same. It's a really minute thing for me to criticize because I know. And I like the character, and I really appreciate the mother-daughter divide, but I'm not sold on Emma Thompson. And also, with Emma Thompson putting on a Scottish accent, you then kind of lose Emma Thompson. So I then question why.
True.
Whereas, before we get to that, I will say... Oh, sorry, Karen.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so you mentioning Harry Potter made me think that great casting for the mother would have been Shirley Henderson, who plays Moaning Myrtle in Chamber of Secrets. Excellent voice and, actually Scottish and like the right generation. I feel like that could have been a good fit.
Yeah, no. And Babu Frick in Star Wars, for anyone that cares. I love her. And appeared in that one episode of Doctor Who with Peter Kay as the Zorboff. God, we're getting some memories.
No James Bond connection yet, as far as I'm aware.
You never know. God, I like that. I like you said that. I think the other thing with this, because we're not sort of pointing and mocking, but when you bring in Billy Connolly as King Fergus, right? And I love Billy Connolly. Obviously, he's an absolute legend of comedy. And I want to say film and TV. I might be wrong in saying I don't think he's as big in America as he is here. I think Americans are aware of him, but not to the extent we are. I don't know if that's unfair or fair. Like when I went to Glasgow a couple of years ago, there was a huge Billy Connolly mural, which looks amazing. At one point, they tried for Sean Connery, and this is a really fascinating discussion, right? Because when we spoke about Cars 2 last week, we very much brought up the fact that They went for an iconic spy of the 60s. The film's paying homage to spy films of the 60s. Pixar might have gone for someone like Sean Connery first, but ended up with Michael Caine, which is nothing wrong with getting Michael Caine either, by the way. But you're looking for that face of who was the spy of the 60s. It's going to totally be Sean Connery. So then the follow-up film, and there's no proof of that. We just discussed it and said they might have gone for him. In this film, it is known that they reached out to try and get Sean Connery to voice the king. Now, this might be the only time I ever say this in history. I'm glad they didn't get Sean Connery for this, because
I'm glad too.
Yeah, Billy Connolly, right? He has such an incredible voice. He's kind of up there with a Robin Williams and a Bryant Blessed for just, I don't know what the word is, not loud, not booming, but they like become
animated.
The anime. Yeah, animated. Like, they are so perfectly capable and beyond capable, make it their own in a couple of sentences before you really get to progress. I will say to myself, I'm so glad it wasn't Sean Connery. And he would have been great. But you know what? He would have needed to have been a very reserved Scottish character, not... Because this is Billy Connolly. And, yeah. I love King Fergus in this. I really, as I know I've said it a few times already, but I really do appreciate he isn't the lead. He's a bit of the comic relief. And there is a relationship side to him. You know, his hatred of the bear, refusing to believe it's his daughter, putting his, I don't want to say his reputation above that of his family, but because everyone in his snare would probably go the way he did. But I love him in this, that it's a stereotype. He's not the one wearing the trousers of their relationship, yet he's the king. I think there's something great about that, and I love the family dynamic. I love his relationship with Merida. I love his relationship with his wife, and they got it right.
Yeah, I think you know, and maybe this makes me I'm a delegate from the Bond Again podcast. Maybe this makes me a bad Bond fan, but I am glad they didn't get Sean Connery for this. Sean, like, could do Sean, like I know him. Sean, my mate Sean, could kind of play up a little bit. Obviously, Indiana Jones, but he's not, to me, like a voice actor. Like a voice actor, I think has particular quality. Billy Connolly is a voice, right? He has, his voice has that kind of animated quality that by itself can conjure characters, you know, like Robin Williams, of course. Brian Blessed, great example as well. So I think maybe Sean Connery could have worked had it been more of that kind of Little Mermaid dynamic, had it been a tension between Merida and the king instead. Like in that case where, you know, that there's less comic relief and more kind of interpersonal intensity, I feel like maybe that could have worked, but that would have been a very, very different film. And I think for this one, Billy Connolly was the right choice as well. And of course, but there was a Bond connection remaining, because in a smaller role, we do get Robbie Coltrane, so that makes me happy.
Yeah, very small role. Another Harry Potter alumni. There's a lot of them today. Again, it's right. If you're doing British films, it's the 2010s. There's gonna be an overlap, considering the quality, not the quality, the quantity of British performers in that. But I loved Robbie Coltrane in the small role, and I also really like Julie Walters. I mean, Julie Walters is just a legend anyway, but I love Julie Walters as the witch. It just worked. I think she's got the kookiness. She's such. Again, it's that background of the actor, go all in, and you could tell she's probably there in the booth having fun, because the witch has so much persona for a role that Disney's done. You know, I know this is Pixar and Disney, but for something you'd have seen so many times historically on camera, this felt a bit different for a change. And I think, again, the performances come with it. And this film, you've been praising it a lot. I do like the voice cast. I think most of it works phenomenally. And something what spoke by it is Patrick Doyle's score is incredible. And I will say right now, without getting too much, maybe because we're in Oscar season, my mind's on Oscars, I am shocked this didn't get a score nomination at the Oscars. I know that he's an Irish composer. He's not Scottish himself. He actually has a cameo as one of the three lords in the film. He worked, and I know the best composers do this. You know, you're doing a historical setting in a background of a certain, what's the right word? Culture. You want to authenticate the culture and use those instruments, use the tapestry, what was available at the time. Ludwig Göransson's become the master of that of I say the new generation of like the big names of the last 10, 50 years that have emerged. Patrick Doyle does this phenomenally with this film. I think the score is excellent. It's not really been spoken about, and I think Patrick Doyle as a composer is somewhat under the radar. That unfortunately, I'm talking Harry Potter again. He did a great score with the Goblet of Fire, but he was always the guy that came after John Williams, and it's pretty hard to follow that up. But it has a phenomenal score. Just the director was the problem with that film. Different conversation. What did you think of the score in this?
Well, I'm a little bit on the fence, if I'm totally honest. We might diverge a little bit here. I have a kind of a slight issue with films that will almost as soon as they begin invoke like certain instrumentation to evoke a particular culture in a way that to me feels a little bit pastiche sometimes. And so I feel like in this, it's like, okay, here we go. It's and I get it's like it's painting a picture with a broad brush and stuff, but for me it can begin to feel a little bit, dare I say, cartoony. However, I feel like for this film, and its target audience, there has to be latitude. So I think in that sense, like it does work. And I think one thing that is great about it, and some people feel totally differently than me on this, but like I do like a score that stands out. To me, it really adds something to the film. For some people, that's distracting. And of course, some film scores that can stand out for the wrong reasons. But I feel like on balance, this is a success, and you've taught me around a little bit. But as the film was opening, I was like, not sure about this. But I did think it got better as it went on.
That's fair. You are right that I'm in the same boat. That give me a score I can hear over not. Oh God, what's my favorite example? Dunkirk. I once had somebody criticize the Dunkirk score to me, saying you can't listen to it, and I was just sat there saying it's a score that's been designed to compensate a film. In this point in time, a literal ticking clock, and you're going to moan you cannot listen to it. That's not an appropriation for best score. It's not best listenable score. It's what compensates the film. But you are right that I'm in the same boat. So I get very excited to talk about Ludwig Göransson because separate conversation. You mentioned Greek mythology earlier. If you had the pleasure, or maybe not pleasure, if you got to see Avatar in IMAX that came out, you got to see the 6-minute Odyssey prologue, and the Ludwig Göransson score in that prologue. I am 99% convinced that he's using instruments from hundreds of years ago. Same thing that Hans Zimmer's.
Wow.
Oh God. There's he's called Pedro Ustache, I think. He works with Hans Zimmer a lot. He tours with Hans Zimmer. Mm-hmm. He plays the Gladiator theme on an actual instrument from literally like thousands of years back. I think the instrument's hundred. I think the specific instrument he uses is hundreds of years old, but that instrument theoretically has been around for thousands of years. I think Ludwig Göransson is going for something very similar. Sorry to go way off topic, but if that is true, he's going to win his third Oscar in a few weeks. He might be looking at number 4 next year, which is incredible to say. But moving on from the score, let's talk about the legacy of this film. So we spoke about it a little bit. We know it was nominated for one Oscar, Best Animated Feature. It won, as is often the case with Pixar, particularly at this point in time. And it was a massive success at the box office. It grossed $540 million. Off a $185 million budget. It was the 13th highest grossing film of 2012, which was a mega year. You had films such as The Avengers, Dark Knight Rises, Some big hitters came out around that time, and this film performed well within that. We spoke about Merida and her journeys becoming an official Disney princess. That's probably the biggest legacy a film like this could have in a nice way. If this film was bad, they definitely aren't saying she's a Disney princess. That's all I would say on that. But where I kind of want to go to with this, if we're somehow going quicker than we thought, but we're up to favorite scenes.
Right.
Do you have a favorite scene? Because I've got one, but I'm going to let you go first in case you've got the same one, just in case.
I think, to be honest, for the kind of emotional stakes of it, I really like the scene where it's as if Merida and Eleanor are doing one another, but Eleanor's kind of practicing, the argument for the benefit of the king, and I don't know if the horse has a name, but Merida is talking to the horse, and I think that really works. I'm a bit of a sucker for scenes in films in general that do the kind of dialogue cut across different locations. Exactly, yeah. Or like not exactly the same, but the telephone scene in When Harry Met Sally, for example, is like an all-time favorite of mine. So I love seeing those things done really well. Like, I just think it's like movie magic. You can't get it anywhere else. So probably that one for me. But there were a lot of highlights, so it's quite hard to choose. What about you?
It was the same scene. I loved the
No way.
There was something watching it. It felt, I don't want to say so. It felt like something I haven't seen in this series so far. And it's not just because you got the mother-daughter argument. The editing, and we don't talk about editing within animation too much, but the editing was so well done. The animators, the face on the king just being almost like an innocent, not what's going on, but the horse, because it's an animal, it's not a person. So they're rehearsing the argument. They are having the conversation they need to have, and they're never going to get the chance to do that after. And watching that, I was like, okay, I've really got a different memory of what this film was before, and that's what stuck with me all week long. It's not been turning into the bear, although I love the scene with the witch, and I love the cottage with all the wooden stuff and all the bears everywhere. I loved
that,
all that bit. But that's the scene that stuck with me. It's not been an action scene. It's not been a bombastic scene. It's been that, which is quite nice. And I'm glad we've had the same one, because I didn't expect that. I'm going to say it first now. But there's a lot of
my honourable mention, if I may. Sorry. My honourable mention, if I may, is the archery scene with the targets. And maybe this is because it reminds me of Robin Hood, which was a favourite when I was young. But I think the fact that she's like, oh, I'm gonna shoot for my own hand, great, love it. And then the fact that she's just like casually like walking with the bow, and then it like goes into like slow-mo for the last one, and we see the arrow kind of wobbling and stuff as they do. I thought that was great. So that's an honorable mention for me for sure.
No, you're right. The arrows, I think, because it was such a prominent part of marketing from memory, that's why it dropped off a bit. But this you don't really get slow-mo and animation. There isn't like generic person jumping into someone for action. It's like, as you said, the when the arrow's leaving the bow and you get the sort of edging wobble in the air. I loved it. Splinting through, going through it. Great moment. And the film's got so many great moments. And heading into my final thoughts, I'm really glad I've had this chat with you today, because I enjoyed this film. I watched it on Sunday, so we were pre-recording a couple of days after. I enjoyed watching it. I was a bit nervous. This was the first film where I was a bit like, okay, bar cars, but I know what I thought of them. But this was the first one where I was like, am I going to dislike this less than 13 years ago, whenever it was? Or am I going to like this more? Because I was very neutral on it before. I liked it. I didn't love it. I didn't dislike it at all. it was just there, and it was probably because I was watching loads of them, and I'd probably, if Letterboxd was thinking about that, I know, I'd probably watch this around the time of Up and Wally or something. So it probably unfairly was in next to all of those. But this film was a lot stronger than I thought, which I didn't get to appreciate in the family dynamics. Certainly, I didn't. And I do think I really not just appreciate that, the choice of setting with Scotland, the voice actors. It felt so original and unique to Pixar. And whilst it is doing the concept of a new Disney princess, this is not the Disney princess tale that we have known for probably 90 years in film history at this point in time. It's something completely new. And even going to the setting of that is important. So it's I don't say thumbs up, that sounds a bit cringy, but I had a lot of enjoyment out of this viewing. And I'm glad I did. And this is the perk of doing a show such as this, or a series like this, where I get to go and revisit the films maybe I wouldn't have. And I get to see them again and think, okay, how was this, 10, 15 years later? And this is one I'm probably a lot more fond of than I originally was. And when it gets to the end of the series, it probably won't be in my top 10, not in a disrespectful way, but I had a Pixar ranking pre-doing all this. Not that I'd given it much thought, I'd had one film every year or something. But Brave was near the bottom. Not out of choice, just out of Whereas this time around, I'm curious. I don't think it would be near bottom now, but I am curious as to where this could go in a nice way, in a complimentary way.
Well, that's great. Like I similarly had some nerves before rewatching, because for me this was really up there in terms of Pixar for me from memory, and I was worried that I wouldn't maybe like it as much. And I did. I'm annoyed at myself for doing it, but I kind of had a little look before I rewatched to see what people who I follow on Letterboxd had given it, and I was a bit underwhelmed by their kind of ratings. And I thought, no, I'll just watch it myself. And there were some points that lulled for me, for sure. Like, I don't think perfect film, but I did really enjoy it. And having this conversation has made me appreciate it even more. So I think on balance, it is about where I thought it was.
Absolutely. I'm glad we've got not just the same thoughts, but the same conversation. It's been a phenomenal discussion as well. I'm so glad we've got you back on for this one, Craig. And I really appreciate as well coming on for Brave.
Thanks.
And people that may be wondering what is going to come up next on the Pixar Retrospective. Well, this is going up at a very interesting time. The time this video going up, we would have just been to the Pixar Mundo event at Wembley. I don't think I'm doing a video, but maybe there's a post on socials, maybe not. If there is, you can get them on the channel. There's a couple of people that have been involved in this series so far and who will be on the next video who are there with us. Unless I magically get even worse and can't go, which I don't think is going to happen. I think I'm at the better end of it all now. But next up, we have Monsters University, followed by Inside Out, followed by The Good Dinosaur, and then bringing on the board Finding Dory. I'm going to say it. It's going to be a really challenging 3/4 of a month without giving too many of my thoughts away. But if it's anything like Brave, if the people are on that do great discussions, I've seen 3 of those films once only. I know exactly which one I like the most. But we're heading into a very interesting point. The 2010s of Pixar is very different to the 90s and the noughties. And that's kind of where we're going with this. So, Craig, it's been amazing to get you back on. We've mentioned Bond again quite a lot today. We've even brought up Sean Connery, the original James Bond, Robbie Coltrane too. I know you've not got an episode at the moment, but what are you guys looking at for the rest of the year? Because there's a lot to happen this year without us knowing, but we know we're getting a game. We're probably going to get a new Bond actor at some point. What are you hoping for?
Well, this is exactly it. I think everyone is expecting this year that a new Bond actor is going to be announced. And I think if that doesn't happen, people are going to be quite disappointed. I am looking forward to the game, 007 First Light. I'm kind of glad it's been pushed back a few months. I think really, not really because of issues and stuff. People have speculated. I think it's been pushed back because of GTA being moved. And so that's giving it more window. So why not? I'm glad, honest, because I save up my fucking PS5 especially to play the game. So yeah, I'll be looking forward to that when it comes. And A new Bond actor, certainly. Bond again at the moment, I mean, there's always some news and reviews to discuss on the show. We're Bond mad, so there's always some way we've been bonding, so to speak. But I think this year in particular, we anticipate the episodes will be coming much more frequently as and when we begin to get some developments. So we'll have to get you on at some point, George. That would be great. Yes. But in the meantime, it's been really good to be back on Cinema Savvy. I've really loved this conversation.
Likewise, it's been amazing to get you back on. I appreciate that. We've had you on for Ratatouille for people that didn't know that already. We will have Sam on for Monsters University. So we'll get it on going. This series has been a lot of fun. And I'm the same as you. I cannot wait for the Bond game.
Underrated film. I'm going to say it. I'll say it.
What do you think?
Excellent. Underrated film University. I'll go on record. I don't mind saying it.
I've seen it once, and I have some very weird, steeped memories from my first job with that film. And I worked at Sainsbury's, which is weird to say as my first job. So that's a weird discussion point for any British people that will think, what's the correlation? There kind of isn't one, but there's a weird one. I
look forward to finding out.
Brilliant, thank you. Everybody watching at home, it's very busy at the moment. We're heading to Oscar season. I keep saying it's very busy. There's been a lot of reviews. Peaky Blinders, Pixar, Peaky Blinders, Pixar, Peaky Blinders, Pixar. The Duck should end. There should be a Wuthering Heights review on the channel by the time this goes up. It's been very busy, planning a lot of things, doing a lot of other things, being ill. We're heading into new releases again. We've got Hoppers coming out in a few weeks. They've now today at the time of recording. There's early screenings on the 28th of February and the 1st of March here in the UK. So it will be showing at normal cinemas the week before it releases. So there'll even be a mini review out for Hoppers before we get to the official entry in the series. But anything else, get us on social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Blue Sky. We are there, linktree.com. We'll put you there. Clips of ours will be on Shorts on Instagram. We've crossed some wild milestones recently, so I want to thank everybody for your involvement in that. Craig, for your time out of your day to join me again. It's very much appreciated. It's been an amazing discussion, and I hope everybody at home has been able to enjoy it as much as I have. So thank you all so much for watching. Take care. I'll see you then.